of the cliff, as you were saying. We do our part, but the biggest part will always lie on the policies of the governments of our countries. Some of them will have to for example, renegotiate their debt commitments because they don't have space enough in the budget to service their debts, so that became unsustainable. So we have 6 countries in that situation that is stressed. So each country has a different challenge on the macro, but I certainly hope with the solidarity of the IMF and other development partners that our countries do not follow off the cliff. Starting with boosting food security, to me that's a top priority. Many countries have done it, even Brazil, which I know better. The situation improved over several decades with more food production. There are still challenges there as well. We have made quite a bit of progress compared to the 80s, for example, on that ground of food security.
Now, you're addressing the key policy areas which you've taken a look at. The first one is the food security. There are some other key policy areas which in your reports you addressed, managing the shifting monetary policies. You also talked about greener growth, setting the stage for sustainable and green growth. And then was the first one, I'm trying to remember, the first one, consolidating public finances. Let's talk about the shift to monetary policies. What did you mean?
Well, inflation is very high. Nigeria, for example, it's at a 17-year high. So when inflation is very high and is disseminating on those items in the basket of goods of our countries, then it means that there's quite a bit of liquidity in the system. A lot of money was pumped into the economy and prices are rising. So it's very important to tackle this by reducing the liquidity or the money in the economy so prices don't continue to escalate. And this is what we mean by shifting. In some countries, the inflation is gallopant and monetary frameworks are not very reliable or credible. You need even to be more decisive on, for example, interest rates or containing the pressures on the liquidity in the system that is driving inflation. And then in the medium to long term, inflation is always going to be a monetary phenomenon. Without money, there is no inflation. So liquidity money has been issued for inflation to start increasing. So it's natural that central banks will then try to restrict liquidity so that this price acceleration cannot be moderated. Yes.
Now, I'm trying to just oppose what you just said with the case of Nigeria, for example. Taking a look at Nigeria's inflationary environment, you said without money there can be inflation, but Nigeria inflation is also thought not to be monetary. Farmers can't get access to their farms. We're having significant crisis, for example. We can't get food that we used to get from those 2 key countries, and all of that. You don't have good roads, as well, so that will feed into the logistic costs of farmers getting. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, in that case, would you say that inflation is a monetary phenomenon in Nigeria?
You know, that's and I don't want to be too academic on it. The thing is that you always have supply side problems or structural conditionings that may drive inflation. And it's true, if they repeat it successively, prices will continue to go up because they're successfully, not successfully, they are succeeding one after the next. So we have shocks. But some problems to be given to the fact that in some cases the prices that are affected by the shocks are not the entire basket of goods. Prices of other items. Like for example, you have the Russian-Ukraine war. It's natural to expect that the price of bread, because of wheat prices, they that doesn't mean that the price of that go up at the same rate that the price of the mean that the price of other food items that are not the price of lettuce or some other vegetables or fruits. That, and I think the central bank has responded to that question by tightening already 500 basis points this year. It may need to go further because inflation is high.
Further, you're saying that the Central Bank of Nigeria's MPC should increase interest rate to tackle inflation.
If inflation doesn't start accelerating in the next months, I'm sure the central bank will be concerned and they will take the conclusions that maybe future will also be needed. Now, in the context of Nigeria, considering the macro monetary framework that is used, that at the end of the day, what you want is the monetary mass or the liquidity in the system to contract. That is not only going to be achieved by raising the monetary policy rate. Two additional steps are very important. For example, the central bank does quite a bit of quasi-fiscal operations, for example, development finance, credits to agriculture, manufacturing, well, scaling that back so that liquidity further is an important thing. Critically, the financing of the deficit in the last years has relied in some part fiscal deficits has relied in some part with monetary financing from the central bank. That also increases the liquidity in the system, the pool of money in the system. That cannot be easily mopped up. When I say mopped up, the central bank needs to sterilize that injection of liquidity and bring it back. If it's not able to do, then liquidity increases and press prices. At the end of the day, what we need is that the monetary growth in the economy to decelerate. It has been very high despite the increases in the NPR. So I think that the central bank understands that and is trying to fight inflation. That became a priority compared to earlier periods, and we have been supportive of those periods, that the central bank was trying to support growth right after the pandemic because, of course, it was a difficult environment and efforts needed to be put in place to support the economy.
Let me play devil's advocate, and I'm just thinking, at the last, we are coming down now to Nigeria. At the last MPC, the Monetary Authority raised the interest rate to 16.5%. It surprised the market for a few people. Some people thought that the MPC was going to hold the rate. But the question really is that with this kind of inflation we've seen, I think in the history, at least for the past few years now, this is the first time I'm seeing inflation accelerating at this pace. We've not really had it this bad in terms of acceleration, quick acceleration. So in the looking at this accelerating inflation, stubborn inflation, are you also taking a look, or the IMF taking a look at if inflation, this accelerating inflation, stubborn inflation, is not responding to accelerating hikes too? Because we've seen 5 times this year that interest rates have been hiked by 500 basis points. Yes, I think so. Not 5 or 4 times. I think 5 times. So, what is the option? I heard you quite unclear. Quasi fiscal policies that the central bank has put its hand into, and all of that. But is there any other thing that the monetary authority can do to make inflation decelerate?
The first thing I want to say on this, Nancy, it's too soon to actually judge if interest rate increases impacting prices, because monetary policy works with legs. You raise interest rates today, the effect of that in the markets, in credit, may actually take at least 6 months. So all the efforts put in place by the central bank will probably working through the system to help decelerate inflation going forward. So we shouldn't expect any immediate impact. But the central bank, of course,
should we expect? Well, they meet once in 2 months. How long are you looking at that when we see completion of these policies?
That varies country by country, and there are various factors that condition the speed at which the transmission from interest rate hikes to the real economy take place. In advanced countries, that can take from 6 to 12 months. In countries like Nigeria, where the transmission may be slower for various reasons, particularly the depth of capital markets is not as deep as in other countries. It may take even further, and it may require higher increases in the rates for the same effect to play out compared to an advanced economy. This is why, for example, several times you see in the US or the European context that interest rates increase by 25 50 basis points. Typically, the same rate needs to increase by more for the same effect to play out because of the transmission. So I think it's too early to say that interest rates will not have an impact. We should certainly monitor closely and be ready to raise more if inflation persists and is stubborn. Typically, when inflation increases, there is some inertia in expectations, and it continues a little longer because those agents in the economy are already used with price increases. There is the issue of the exchange rate, the foreign exchange. There is a channel with a lot of liquidity, so maybe foreign exchange is not as available, that people go to the foreign exchange market. It's very important to monitor the channels and make sure that there is less naira around floating for inflation to start reducing. The challenge there, Nancy, I must say, is that when you have supply shocks like we were discussing before, it's the most difficult situation for the central bank, because in those situations the economy is already suffering a little bit from those shocks, and at the same time you have inflation. So then central banks face this trade-off: how much tightening can I put in place when the economy is not exactly where the central bank doesn't like to be, and needs the support of other policies
You spoke earlier on about the fiscal deficit, which is the central bank borrowing to the government just a few days ago. So debt increased from 42 trillion now to to reduce this fiscal stress. You want to also reduce that central bank is not lending, which is even more than its statutory limit. That shouldn't be lending that much to the federal government. That's a part of the question. Sorry, Ari, the big part of the question is, with all the challenges that we're talking about, what is the IMF doing to support countries that are already challenged, such as Nigeria? I know the SDI was last year, 2020? IMF gave countries some of these, and all of that. Is the IMF taking of support to challenge countries, Nigeria inclusive?
Okay, so in terms of the deficit and how to finance, I think it's important to take one step back and see why do we have deficits. And the first line of action, as we discussed in fact last time I was here, is revenue mobilization. The country needs more revenue. Luckily, the non-oil revenue has been increasing, and this is not actually. This is because of policies adopted at the Ministry of Finance level to mobilize more revenues. I think what didn't happen this year was in the oil sector.
Went down.
The revenues were not commensurate with even high oil prices, because production did accompany, and because also the fuel subsidies took a big chunk of it. So the country could not benefit from the oil boom in terms of the revenue, like other countries in fact benefited. So that, my answer to you is that if you just eliminate subsidies out of a 6% deficit, 1/3 of the size of the deficit, just by taking that measure. That's why it's very important that Nigeria actually takes that decision sooner rather than later. So the other, so that reduces the financing needs of the country significantly. It will be much lower. If you raise revenues more, then you reduce the deficit even further. And reducing the deficit further, if the economy is growing reasonably well, the debt to GDP ratio is not going to continue to increase. It's now at a moderate level. And you have more revenues to have the fiscal space. So I think that the discussion of that in Nigeria is a discussion about how to mobilize more revenues and how to make sure that you can do good spending, not subsidies with the poor people who need, but not universal anymore type of subsidies. Otherwise, they're going to benefit from the current positive global environment in terms of commodity prices. Of course, if the economies of the world next year we are projecting a decline of the commodity prices also starting to soften, will be as good for emerging economies, commodity producing countries. But I think this year has shown that even if you have high commodity prices, because of the high level of subsidies that are universal, you'll be prevented to reduce buffers that were used in which you should have used.
So in 2009 financial recession that plagued the world, but Nigeria is a bit of because we had buffers. Now let me come back to the
IMF. What are we doing? So in various economies who have a balance of payments needs, we are trying to put financial programs in place. Reforms and assistance with finance so that to mitigate the effects of some of the adjustments that the economies need. In other countries, Nigeria is the country in question, we are putting a lot of effort on capacity building, particularly on tax administration and tax policy. And we have even brought a resident on tax administration to support this effort according to the SRGI.
Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative of the Federal Ministry of Finance.
Exactly. So how to support FIRS, customs, to actually deliver on the strategic need is communicating. So we are trying to work by beefing up the capacity building efforts, training and resources to the country to increase the level of
so the support is coming in terms of technical support now?
Yeah.
Not military support?
And policy advice.
And policy advice. Okay, how much of the challenge is Nigeria's debt? Really? We've heard so much about debt to GDP ratio, but we also be quick to always remind the minister at every time that is debt to revenue ratio is also debt servicing ratio, as it were. But the Minister of Finance has always said Nigeria that we have a revenue problem. How much of the debt? How much of the challenge is our debt? Really? 44 trillion now public debt.
You see, this economy is a big economy and it grows at a reasonable level, and it can accommodate that level of debt. So it's not a solvency problem as some of the countries that we know.
That's for Nigeria?
For Nigeria.
So we don't have a solvency problem?
Not a solvency at the moment. Solvency problems would happen when the country is no longer able to pay and is in a trajectory that we consider unsustainable, meaning that the growth rate is no longer able to compensate the debt increases, even because of the debt service. Because the debt stock increases with the fiscal deficits that include the debt service. So if the debt service is increasing and putting the country in a trajectory that is not able to grow to service its own debt, then it's unsustainable and then it's a solvency issue. So we are very far from that type of situation here. What we have is a liquidity strain that can be resolved by bringing more resources into the treasury. And the way to do that is by collateralizing collecting more revenues. If you have more revenues, you'll be able to service that debt. And how to bring more revenues? One is eliminating the few subsidies, so deductions don't happen and all revenues can increase. Other is by producing more oil, in the case that we were discussing, so oil revenues can increase with the volume of production. But all types of initiatives in the Finance Act are being discussed, excise taxes, other revenue vehicles are important, improving the administration, increasing compliance, like taxpayers for paying their due debts, and making sure that the quid pro quo, that funds are used properly, to increase the trust between taxpayers and the government, so that you can enter a positive spiral of more revenues and better use of those in the provision of public goods and services. Nigeria is not a case of too little spending. It's a case of too little revenues. It's not about cutting, because spending in health, education, social protection is very, very low. It's even lower than what is being spent in terms of few subsidies. So it's a question of raising more revenues. It's a consolidation of the public finances through stronger revenue mobilization.
Just before we go, we're still talking about you wanted to run out very quickly, but just before you go, still talking about this debt issue, what do you think is the impact of the strong dollar on servicing, not just even Nigeria's debt, but other SSA countries, sub-Saharan African countries? We've seen the impact of an appreciating dollar. We have, of course, the parallel market in other countries too. For example, Ghana. Just like 2 days ago, yes, the Ghana currency started doing well, but in the past few weeks, or even in the past few months, Ghana has really been bleeding. Other countries too. So, what do you think is the impact of the strong dollar on debt servicing?
This is an excellent question, and we have a chart where we show that the debt level for the region is reaching as a share of GDP pre-HIPIC, pre-highly indebted poor country initiative that there was debt relief for various countries. So we have reproduced, unfortunately, the pre-HIPIC debt levels. One important aspect of that, the composition of the debt also changed. We used to rely more on bilateral, cheaper, and longer term debt, and now we rely more on Eurobonds and domestic bonds as well. That's positive for the capital markets. But to your specific question, and I think it's very important to notice the composition. Countries that have a very high share of its debt denominated in foreign currency, every time that the currency depreciates, it puts an additional burden in their not only local currency, in their fiscal resources, because you need to raise more of the local currency to service that debt. So it constrains the fiscal space. So when we talk about debt risks, the composition, not only the levels, as we were discussing before, the composition, the diversification among creditors, all those aspects of the profile of debt of the country take a very important role. And in your question, if you have a high share of the external and denominated in foreign currency, certainly if your currency depreciates, your burden to service that debt will increase.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, it is very clear. And I hope it's clear to my views too. Just before you go, something came into my head. Article 4 consultation.
Yes.
The next one.
So we just finished about how many weeks now? 2-3 weeks ago.
So,
and we have published a concluding statement on these discussions with the government. They were very good and cordial as always. The next one is going to be only in 1 year, but we have actually put all those things that we have been discussing today, the revenue-based fiscal consolidation as policy advice, tightening monetary policy and making inflation the primary goal of the central bank, reducing inflation now is critical. Food security issues, we even had a very nice presentation on food security and food insecurity in Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa that was presented by one of our economists to various stakeholders, particularly the government, to highlight the importance of handling the issue